It was the end of an era, as the congregation of Zion United Church closed the doors for the last time. The first service at Zion was in 1885. The final service, 2013. Parishioners past and present attended the service, which featured memories of the many contributions of Zion United Church over the years. The service was led by Reverend Bev Sumbler to a very sad crowd.
Well, once again, welcome everyone to our worship this morning on this closing worship, gratefulness for Zion United Church. It is so good that you've taken time out of what is a busy, busy time of the year to join with those of us who would be here most Sundays and to help us celebrate and give thanks for this day. I know that on behalf of the folks of Zion, I would love to thank June and Penny and Carrie for all the work that they have put into this particular morning. And I know that it is through them and their work over this last while that those of you who are gathered amongst the regular folk are here. So thank you so much to the three of you for doing so. And it is so lovely to have all of you here today. In particular, I would like to thank Maxine Reed for being with us today. Maxine is the chair of Shining Waters Presbytery, and she does have a part to play in our worship later today. So thank you to all of you for being here. I really would be remiss to mention all the names because I don't want to miss somebody, but just to thank each and every one of you. I also have a note here that I wish to share with you folk, and in particular this will resonate for the folk of Carmel and Zion, and in particular for Harry. And Harry, this note has come to us all the way from Neville Hall, Middleham, North Yorkshire. A few weeks ago, I contacted our dear friend Rodney Tennant. Rodney, for those of you who do not know, is a gentleman. He and his family have been coming this way from North Yorkshire for quite some time, long before my time here. And they had a cottage on in the Bridge North area, but I understand their first few years here, they would come and stay at Irwin Inn. And Rodney would come and worship with us. And he never ever misses a Sunday while he's here. And so this note is from Rodney. What is so precious and will remain with me are the friendships formed with Jerry and Netta, that's Jerry and Netta O'Mara, Harry and Marta, and Carl, and of course the wider community. Zion Church as a building will always remain, and the Church of Zion will continue. And for that, we must give thanks and remain positive.
It was a sad day for everyone in attendance, but no one more so than Harry Hamilton. Zion United Church had been part of Harry's family since he was born.
So thank you very much, and I want to welcome everyone here to this celebration of 128 years of this Zion Church here at Hall's Glen, and the celebration of all the faithful people who have served here over the years. This is 128 years since the church was built. And my parents moved here in 1938, so I've been here for 75 of those years. So you do a little math, there's 53 years before that before I arrived. And this, go back a little further, this wasn't always Hall's Glen. It was started out as Hemlock Hill. And then in the mid 1870s, it became Hall Glen, and then the S was added, so it's finally Hall's Glen. But before this church started, this congregation, there was the area here at, well, Hemlock Hill, as it was then, was settled in the early 1830s. And so for 20 years or more, people met in the homes and had their worship services there, and it rotated from home to home. But the call to worship was a horn being blown, and everybody would assemble then and have their worship. Then in 1852, the first Wesleyan Methodist log church was built, and that was right here on the corner where Bertie has her vegetable stand now. That was the original church, and it was built in 1852, and the land was donated by Thomas Crow. So that was the church until 1885, and then this church was built, and the land here was donated by James Little, his property. And the log church north of here then was sold to the Orangemen, and they carried on. The Orange Hall was there then for almost 100 years. I think it was in the early 1980s that it finally closed and was torn down. So after this church was built, there was a dedication on October the 4th, 1885, followed by an evening tea in the meeting. And some of the early church members at that time would be Littles, Carveth, Hunter, Darling, Crow, McCracken, Brown, Moore, and the first wedding here at the church was in 1901, and it was Alec Darling and Ida Carveth. And that was on December the 25th, 1901. And my early remembrance of the church was that it was here. There wasn't any Sunday school room, of course, but there was a L-shaped shed for the horses, and it went out this way and turned along the boundary there, and the church yard wasn't as big then. It was just went to where we drive in out here. And so then the other part was added in 1990 then. The church had only one entrance. You didn't come up around that way. You came in on the front here. The road was changed then afterwards, and instead of a hill here onto County Road 6, the hill was in front of the church. So we used to have angle parking here at the side of the church originally. So the other thing I remember was first there was 2 stoves in here, and I know there's other ones here. Remember that? Percy, Maryland, when there was a stove in each corner, and with lots of heat there. I'm not sure how much came up to the front of the church, but there wasn't any hydro then either. It was, I remember the 2 stoves, and then the choir loft was a bit different. It was 1 step lower, came across here and around, and that was the choir loft with a little gate here at the front from that aisle. this platform was built in 1952, and it was to accommodate the Orangemen who were putting on plays at the time, and they needed a place to put on their plays, so this was built. And then during the time that there were renovations, periods of time during over the years, the 10-set ceiling and the walls were redone. We had church service in the Orange Hall next door. 1964, there was a new oil furnace put in, and it's under the floor at the back. There's an opening there for it. Walls were paneled in the, I'd say, the 60s, and new steel roof. And going through the books, the UCW donated $200 towards the steel roof. 1980, the Sunday school edition was added, and we had Percy Little. I'd say he was the chief architect and overseer of the work, and it was done, but it was all done by ones from the church. In the stone or cement wall downstairs, there's a jar where the names are in there. You can see it just on the edge of the cement. So names, the ones I remember, like Paul McClenahan, Percy Little, Howard Hamilton, Ralph Hamilton, Everett Carvath, Elwood Payne, Roy French, Merv Nelson, Ernie Flint, and there may be others I'm trying to think who might have been, but that's the ones that I remembered them. Some notes from over the year, just a few interesting notes. The hymn racks in the pews, they were made by James Brown. A good Sunday offering was $1. The first annual meeting was held in 1918. Mrs. William Henry Little was Zion's first organist, and she died at the age of 33 when her son Henry was 9 months old. And I think some of you remember Henry, of course. He lived here where the O'Mara's farm was. On August the 7th, 1925, a social evening was held at the Orange Hall. Sandwiches, cake, and ice cream were served, followed by a program, and charge was 25 cents, adults 10 cents for children. The pulpit chair, the chairs back here, and were donated by a cottager at McCracken's Landing, Mrs. Prittie, P-R-I-T-T-I-E, and her daughter gave us the brass bells. Lauren Morrison had a men's choir organized, and it traveled around different churches. Henry Little was treasurer for 27 years and was an elder for more than 50 years. I mentioned like the wiring was done in 1948 by Gordon Hamlin. And so up until then, I guess used coal oil lamps. I can't remember what, but we didn't have hydro until 48. The cross back here was made and donated by Ralph Hamilton. The piano was memory of Howard and Mildred Hamilton. There's some other notes that taken from back in 1906. After careful examination, the auditor reported that the account correct with a balance of $38.16. And insurance was $8. Mrs. William Carvath was paid $15 for care of the church for the year. And William Carveth, her husband, furnished 3.5 cords of wood, 3 hard, half cord of kindling, and this was 1909, $4.50 a cord. 1942, moved by Mrs. Garfield Crowe, seconded by Mrs. Henry Little, that the Zion congregation would approve the parsonage board having authority to spend $22 per year without asking permission. And there's at the back there's a financial report, 1938. Receipts for the year were expenses for the year were $401.97. And the ladies came through with $160 to make up the difference between the receipts and the expenses. 1942, the trustees were Alec Darling, Henry Little, Garfield Crowe, Joseph Moore, Howard Hamilton, Walter Carveth, David Brown, Ralph Hamilton, Melvin Carveth, and Alan Oliver, Ernest Butler. So, my parents moved here in 1938, and they bought the farm in the place where I still live from the Browns. And so Mrs. David Brown wrote poetry. So she had several poems that she had written. In fact, Mrs. Brown's picture is on the, you can see it up there on the booklet at the back. And interesting that in all these books, it was always Mrs. David Brown, but there never was a first name. And so I went to the cemetery in Warsaw, and her name is Lily. So Lily Brown, and that's the, but it wasn't. It isn't written anyplace in. And she died in 1922 at the age of 45.
The UCW at Zion United Church had a very rich history. The congregation on this, the final service at Zion United Church, welcomed Penny Little to give a brief overview of the UCW.
Throughout those early years, much of their meetings, the time was spent on how to raise money for the church. Making a quilt, of course, required a pattern. Where would they construct it? They needed space for a loom. How to promote and sell the quilt, etc. One was sold to Mrs. Joe Little for $12, provided she had it on exhibition at the Christmas concert on December the 11th. Zion's willing workers varied the ways in which they made money for the upkeep of the church. Many afternoon teas, bazaars, potlucks, wiener rolls, bake sales, rummage sales were held up to finance the church needs. One tea boasted proceeds of $6.70. That's a lot of teas to make any money, isn't it? In 1960, a commission of work of women was set up by the General Council of the United Church of Canada to prepare a constitution for new women's organizations. And so in 1962, the UCW, United Church Women, was formed. And you'll recognize the charter members. The president was Mrs. Henry, or Pearl Little. Mrs. Oswald Little was Beatrice. Second VP was Mrs. Muriel Carveth, Everett's wife. Second secretary was Mrs. Harry Hamilton, Marta. And her assistant, Mrs. Cora Oliver, Alan's wife. The treasurer was Mrs. Walter, or Alma Hamilton. That's sort of ringing bells for me. The pianist was Mrs. Percy Little. And I think, Jean, you probably worked your way right up to president at one time, didn't you? Anyway, there was also Mrs. William Crow, Betty, Mrs. Ernest Butler, Ina, Mrs. Fred Marsden, Hilda, Mrs. Florence Hamilton, Ralph's wife, Mrs. T. Watson, Mrs. Jack Morgan, Madeline, Mrs. A. Carbath, Annie, Mrs. Archie Cameron, Margaret, and Mrs. Art Little, Lila. So from the willing workers to the present-day UCW ladies, they brought guidance, strength, leadership, and oh yes, a little money, to the wonderful history of Zion Church at Hallsglen.
Another very important part of the history of Zion United Church was the Sabbath School, or the Sunday School, which operated very successfully for many years. At the final ceremony at Zion United Church, June Drain offered a bit of the history.
All of the history you've heard basically has come from the books that were kept over the years, and hopefully you get a chance. They're up here, and pictures at the back and so forth, to have a look at some of those books. They're wonderful history. And they were kept in a bread box, and we were very fortunate that Shirley Miles had that bread box, and so her family had all that history, and it was given to us. But the history of the Sunday School starts in one of those books in 1903. So in those early years, it was known as the Sabbath School, not Sunday School. And May 14th, it was moved that the treasurer pay $1 for the Sabbath School supplies for that year. So imagine what you get for $1 for supplies right now. And those that organized the Sabbath School were A.C. Carbeck, Mrs. M.E. Crow, Mrs. Carvel, Mrs. A. Darling, and Reverend McQuaid. Now in 1905, it was decided they were going to have an entertainment night held December the 20th. So that's 108 years ago. A group met right here for a concert. Now the admission to that concert was 10 cents for women and 15 cents for men. I thought that. I like that idea. We'll maybe follow through on that idea. Now, Mrs. David Brown, as you hear, was a wonderful writer of poems. So she has written, this is one of her poems. It's the organization of the Young People's Class, May 1914. That's 100 years ago, this May, she wrote this. Now, during those years, they only had Sabbath School from spring to fall. Our Sabbath School opened the 1st of May. We expected to start in the same old way, but someone suggested we make a move, our methods of teaching to improve. Of course, the old scruples had to be met, fearing our old system all would upset. Finally, it came to be decided that our Bible class should be divided. A competent teacher, Mrs. David Brown, was elected at last to take charge of the young people's class. Then, into her class, the young ladies came and soon mixed up with a lot of fine young men. That's why it worked much better than just sitting boys here and girls there. The former teacher is pleased with results. She now has a fine class of adults. Both young and old, great interest feel, and study the lesson with intelligent zeal. Our superintendent, Alex Darling, is glad it was moved. He now finds his Sabbath School greatly improved. He was almost discouraged many a time. Listen to this, for he felt that his school was on the decline 100 years ago. Our enterprising new teacher now thought it was wise for young people's class to organize. They appointed their president, I am sure he suits, with a fine staff of young officers that bring in recruits. Now, young friends, you ought to be proud. Your president, Walter Carbeck, was chosen right out of the crowd and sent to the convention where we are told, with 300 young men, his name was enrolled. Now, we hope those young people all will aspire to something grander, nobler, and higher, and to their duty be faithful and true, like Gideon's 300 chosen few. We hope they will soon join the temperance and drive liquor right out of our land. Make desperate war on those old beer mugs and smash them all with Gideon's jugs. Now our Sabbath school is on the move. We hope it will continue to improve. In God we trust whatever befall, and may our superintendent guide us all. So that was another of Mrs. Brown's poems. In 1930, it was moved at a meeting that Howard Hamilton and some of his family were to be here last Sunday, but that's how it goes. We lost some due to the weather. But it was moved that once a month that Howard was to give a talk on missionary work or on temperance. And in 1934, $6 out of the Sunday school money was to be paid in the ministry's salary, but if they needed it, it was to be paid back. So then I went on to the next book, which was the Congregational Meeting, which is up there. It's from 1938 to 1999. Now, in 1943, Reverend Snellgrove asked if any members could offer any suggestions that might be of help to bring some inspiration to the children of the community. That was 70 years ago. Now, I won't tell you why I know exactly how many years ago that was. You listened closely, you heard the year. In 40s and 50s, Ralph Hamilton was the superintendent, and 67 to 70 was Eric Carbeck, 71 to 73 was Earl Ivey, 74 to 70 was Harry, 76 to 84 was Jean Little, and during that time, Jean's daughter Susan played guitar. And boy, I remember this Sunday school was very lively. And if some of you here remember that song, I'm too young to march in the infantry, shoot their artillery, fly over them. And the kids love that. The noisier the better, because we seem to have a large group of rambunctious boys in those days. During those years, Eric and Betty Drain, Lois Nelson and family, Ned O'Mara, Cecilia Flint, Roy and Donna French, Gordon Pam Maitland, Velma Ivan, Marcia Rainey were some who worked during those years with the youth. Some Sundays in the 60s and 70s, late 60s, 70s, we were very crowded here at Zion because we sometimes had 40 to 50 attending Sunday school. And we didn't have the new room until 1980. So we were crammed in here, but it worked. Now, many of us were, I guess you'd call young families in those days, and we had children. And here the population shift. And I think this is the prime place where you can visualize that population shift. Because those kids all grew up, and many moved away. But most of the parents, we stayed put. And so we moved from an area, a community with young families to being, we're called an aging population. Very few children. Our bus stop had 17 kids, and they all came to this Sunday school, and it went to 0 kids getting on the bus. So, but you know, the wheel goes around. I think it will eventually go around again, but I don't think we're going to be living to see it. But have hope, because I think it will go around. How many of you remember those famous Christmas concerts? I know some of you sitting down there remember them for sure. And I think many of us have a memory in our minds of those concerts. Now, when I first moved here and came to the first concert, for some reason, my memory was of Carl Hamilton. I can just see Carl standing up there performing, but it wasn't always what was scripted. And I think about his acting ability from Dad Harry, right? and Carl just so much added to the concerts. A little later, Carl kind of grew up, and along came Jeff. Jeff was to be here last Sunday. Along came Jeff Hamilton and my son Mark. Now, those two always seem to add their own spin to the script. And I wonder why it is we always remember something foolish. You know, we can remember those. We don't remember likely the profound acts. Maybe it's because laughter's good for our soul. And the audience seemed to find some of those antics humorous. But I know the parents of those, you know, wish we'd had a long lasso we could just look around them. Harry has touched on the new edition, which was a wonderful gift. But as the children moved away, our Sunday school dropped 12 to 15, and I eventually became the teacher for all ages, and that worked really well. They loved to perform Bible stories for the church at times, and I especially remember Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. We just called them Shadrach and Benny, because the kids couldn't remember those big names. And I remember Edith Scott saying to me, she wondered how I was going to do that, but anyway, we had the pit here, the fire pit, and we plunged one kid down in there, and they loved doing that. And each year they looked forward to the walk through Easter after the service, at the close of the Easter service. The youth were also involved in our Living Christmas Tree in Warsaw. Do you remember that? Oh, what an event that was. And those that were the angels at the very top of that tree, I forget how tall that tree was, but they remember that still. And I can't think there was one little one that was an angel that wouldn't go up alone, and I had to go up and sit in a little step beside her. That was a frightening place up there. I only did that once. They assisted our own Baba Joan Hobson with the story of Noah. Remember that great story? There's pictures up here to look at that. We did lots of things. I took them to a corn maze, which I thought was kind of crazy after I got lost. But anyway, they loved doing things outside of the church and as a group, and so they were great. And my memories of my time with all these kids I treasure. And maybe someday, I hope if they find themselves in a difficult situation, that they might remember. Sometimes, way back in Sunday school with that old lady named June, we often talked about many things they face at school, on the playground, in life. One important one that I really tried to convey to them, and I use toothpaste to demonstrate. Have you ever tried to squirt the toothpaste out, put it back in the tube? Well, I demonstrated that what comes out of your mouth, you can't put back in. And children so often just say hurtful, not just children, but they start there, hurtful things, and you can never put it back in. So that was one of our lessons that I hope they remember down the road. So from 1903 to 2013, many children and youth have sat in these very seats. They've performed on this stage. They sang. They've heard the Christmas story, they've heard the Easter stories, and for that, we give thanks.
From within these walls, many have gone out to serve you in the world, and we give you thanks, O God. The time has come for us to go now from this house and to journey in faith in new and unfamiliar ways. We do so with sadness, but also in hope. We do what so many faithful people have done before, walking with trust and confidence in you, knowing you do not abandon us, but lead us always with your light. And together we give you thanks, O God.
Zion United Church, part of the community since 1885, closes the door forever.